Hello class, welcome to the final segment in the week 7 material. And in this final segment, we're going to take a look at the split function and how exactly that works and sort of illustrate what exactly is going on when we take the split function and apply it to a string. So up here on the screen here, I have two sets or two statements of Python code. So here I am defining a string, which is just equal to that, how are you today, including the blank spaces that appear there. And here we're going to say take the name of that string, which is just called my string, and say dot split. And then the value that we put inside of the parentheses here is going to be another string. And that will tell the computer how exactly we want it to split that string. Now, essentially what goes on here is the computer is actually going to be sort of driving a divider between each individual. Every time it finds this particular character, in this case, a blank space, every time it finds that particular character in our string, it's actually going to sort of put a divider, sort of a dividing line, just sort of slice that string up down the character that we put here, and then we're going to actually get back a Python list from that, and that Python list will actually go on the left-hand side of the equal sign here inside of this variable called myList. So to sort of illustrate that, so here's the string that we started with, and now we're saying divide everything up by taking a divider and putting the divider through every single empty blank space here. So you divide this up, put these dividers in between, put these dividers over the blank spaces. So now we get, that'll actually give us back 4 different items here, just sort of dividing those up. And that will actually be translated into a Python list, where the first entry in that Python list will be, in this case, how, and the fourth entry, today, including the question mark, and that will then become our Python list that goes in the left-hand side, in this case, a variable called myList. And if we want to change that up a little bit, so now we have, instead of dividing everything by the spaces, we could also divide everything by the lowercase o's, or split everything up according to the lowercase o's. Same idea. Dividing lines go, or dividers go down the lowercase o's, and that will split the string up into several different items. And this capital H will be the first item in the resulting Python list. This character sequence W space R space Y will be the second item. This character sequence U space T will be the third item, and then day with a question mark will become the fourth item in the resulting Python list. And again, just like before, that Python list then goes on the left-hand side into this variable called myList. And you'll notice that when I apply the split function, you'll notice how I lose the character that went in the split function here. So before, when I said dot split with the empty space, I lost all the empty spaces. And you'll notice how in this case, when I say dot split lowercase o, you'll notice I lose all the lowercase o's here. So that's something to sort of keep in mind when you encounter the split function, or whenever you use it. Whatever you put inside the split function, you're actually going to lose that character. And as we've just illustrated, the computer is going to sort of divide the string up by putting a divider down each of the putting a divider down the character that we put in the split function. And that's, in doing that dividing, that's going to, or that's splitting, as it is called the split function after all. In doing that splitting, it's going to give us back a Python list, and each individual entry in the Python list will be, you sort of think of this as, say, taking like a massive knife and just slicing or splitting a large string, and when you cut that string up, you'll get multiple different items. You'll get multiple different portions, and each of those portions become an item in a Python list. Sort of the same idea here. So in this case, the first portion would be, or the first item would be this capital H. Then again, this character sequence W space R space Y. Then this character sequence U space T. And then this character sequence at the very end, day, including the question mark there. And if we want to, we can take this demonstration further. So let's say we have a list of numbers. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. We have a string that has numbers in it, and those numbers are separated by commas. This is not actually a list. This is, in fact, a string. Now let's say, okay, if we want to get all the numbers out of there, then we can just simply apply a split function to our string and split according to the commas here. So kind of like before, we put our divider lines, or we put our dividers down the commas to split that function up, or to split that string up into multiple different items, and those multiple different items then become entries in a Python list that then goes on the left-hand side here, in this case in a variable called myList. And something that we actually showed in the very first segment is when we put a \n inside the split function here. And you'll remember way back from week 1, \n is basically the computer's equivalent of hitting the return key. So every time the computer goes down to a new line, there's a \n embedded in that text somewhere. And if we want to divide everything up into individual lines, again, something that we sort of alluded to in the week, or in the first segment of this weekly unit, if we want to divide everything up into lines and make sure that each individual line becomes an entry in a Python list, then we can use the split function to accomplish that, much like what we've done in the previous examples, putting dividers down the \ns, and the portions that we've cut up, then so to say, the portions that we've cut up then become entries in a Python list. And again, just like before, that Python list goes on the left-hand side here. So if we want to actually demonstrate that, everything that we've just shown, so here I'm using some different variable names, but the variable name is not important. The main thing that we want to focus on is what is actually going on here, the actual computer's operation. So here we're going to demonstrate the very first one. So here we have this variable banana set equal to how you are today, the same exact character sequence that we first began with. And now we're saying take that string and split it down the empty spaces. And again, we'll get a Python list back from that. And that Python list then goes in this variable called Sunday. And here we're printing out Sunday here. And if we want to run that, you'll see how in printing out that entire list, you can see it did in fact do exactly what we just described. Everything is, this string is sliced down the spaces. And the reason why we know it's sliced down the spaces is there's an empty space in the split function here, and it's slicing those up into multiple portions. Each portion becomes an entry in a Python list, and you can see the resulting Python list that we get back from that. And just like any other Python list, we can pull individual entries out. So Sunday {0} will enable us to pull the very first entry out of this list that we get back here, since Sunday now holds onto a Python list, and you can see it does in fact print out the very first entry, or item number 0 in our list. And again, we can so this from a more practical standpoint would be a great way to take a string and isolate each individual word in the string. And that will just go into a Python list, and Python lists are a little bit easier to work with than a string because it's pretty easy to access individual entries in a list, where if you don't do the step and try to access each individual word in a more manual approach, it'll be a little bit harder to do that. It is possible, but if you're just trying to isolate each individual word, then this approach using the split function is a much easier way to accomplish that same end goal. And if we want to demonstrate the other examples that we showed, so here we'll go ahead and slice this string down the lowercase o's, and you'll see we do in fact get the exact same result that we demonstrated. And if we want to, so here we have the same string that we had earlier, and here I'll split that down the commas, and you'll see same idea. Now, one thing you'll notice here is even though those are actually numbers, since I had a string to begin with, each individual entry in this Python list is still treated as a string. So that means if I try to do something like this, it will not do mathematical addition. It's still being treated as a textual item. It's still being treated as a string. So if I want the computer to actually look at that as the number it really is, then again, we have to use the casting functions that we talked about in week 6 to accomplish that. And there you can see that is much more mathematical than what we started with. So sort of resetting this, the last example that we demonstrated, how we can divide everything up, divide all the lines up. into a Python list to get each individual line in a string. And you can see works the exact same way as what we demonstrated previously. Now, this is going to be especially useful because when you're one of the data sets that you're going to be working with this week is going to be stored in a CSV file, which stands for comma separated values, which is more or less a way of holding onto a spreadsheet. Each individual row in the spreadsheet is separated by an individual line. It's separated by carriage return. In other words, this \n. And then each individual column is separated by a comma, much like what we had here. So this could be a super simple CSV file that only has one row. So this would be row 1, column 1, row 1, column 2, row 1, column 3. So these split functions can be very helpful when working with external files because usually there's some sort of discernible pattern within the actual file itself. And by using these split functions and maybe some other tools like some loops or something like that, you can get the computer to take the contents of the file, which starts off as a string, and convert it into a Python list, which is a lot easier to work with. And that's something that you'll sort of get a first look at during the course of this week's assignment. But that's going to do it for the week 7 material. So with that, I will see you all in the next weekly unit where we start talking about something called NumPy arrays and how to actually plot information onto a graph. So I will see you all there.